What was happening in that banana grove wasn't just destruction, it was a choice. And the most disturbing part wasn't what was being destroyed, but what was being avoided. Because, according to those who lived through it up close, there was a monster that came out on full moon nights and needed to destroy everything around it so it wouldn't enter a house and wipe out an entire family. You've probably heard stories about werewolves, usually tied to violence, attacks and death, but this story doesn't follow that pattern. Here, the horror isn't in who died, it's precisely in the fact that no one died, and that only happened because of something far more unsettling than any attack. This account comes from the countryside of Rio Grande do Sul, near Santa Maria, and was passed on by someone who grew up living through it firsthand. Feeling in her own body the weight of nights that seemed endless, nights where silence wasn't peace, it was a warning. She grew up surrounded by open fields, constant wind, and the distant sounds of nature. But what defined that place wasn't what could be seen during the day, but what could be felt when night fell. Because there, silence wasn't just the absence of sound. It was the presence of something that seemed to watch, to wait, to move when no one was looking. And that feeling grew even stronger when the full moon appeared in the sky, casting a cold, pale, almost sickly light, completely transforming the environment, as if that same place stopped being safe. On those nights, the routine changed completely without anyone needing to say a word. Doors were closed earlier, windows locked tight, and even the simple act of staying up late felt wrong. No one went outside. No one looked through cracks. It was as if the entire community followed an invisible rule, a rule that existed long before any logical explanation. And even though no one liked to talk about it openly, everyone knew exactly why they behaved that way. The fear had a name, but it wasn't spoken. Werewolf. But unlike the usual stories, this wasn't a predator roaming houses in search of people. And maybe that's what makes it even more disturbing, because what it did wasn't any less terrifying, just different, and in a way, more conscious. The morning after every full moon, the scene in the region's banana grove always told the same story, even without words. It was impossible to ignore. The banana trees, large, heavy, deeply rooted in the ground, were torn out as if they were fragile, thrown from side to side, with exposed roots and violently ripped trunks. There was no human pattern in that destruction. No clean cuts, no tools, just force. A wild, almost desperate force that seemed to have been unleashed for hours until nothing remained standing. The ground was covered with shredded leaves, broken branches, and a thick sap slowly dripping, creating a disturbing image that, to a child, looked like blood spread across the field. And maybe that image was exactly what made everything even harder to understand, because it didn't feel natural. It didn't seem like part of any known cycle. It felt like the result of something that shouldn't exist. And like any child, she asked what had happened, who had done it, why, and the adults never answered directly. They avoided it until, at some point, someone would say in a low voice, almost like a warning, "He's burning off energy. It's how he keeps from coming after us." That sentence didn't explain, but it revealed something much bigger, because it implied that it wasn't just meaningless destruction, it was a form of control, it was a choice, and more than that, it was an attempt. According to the elders, whatever transformed on those nights didn't completely lose consciousness. Somewhere within the pain, the change, the loss of control, something human still existed. Something that remembered, something that resisted. And that was exactly what made it, at the most critical moment when the violence could have been directed anywhere else, choose the banana grove, not by chance, but as a destination. There, it released everything, every ounce of fury, every impulse, every fragment of what it couldn't control, everything was channeled into those plants. As if each tree destroyed was one more barrier between it and something irreversible, as if by doing that, it was holding something far worse inside itself. And then comes the detail that completely changes the story. The adults knew who he was. He wasn't a stranger. He wasn't a faceless creature wandering the fields. He was someone close. An ordinary man seen during the day, part of the routine, part of the community. Someone who probably talked, smiled, lived like anyone else. And even so, no one said anything. No one reported him. No one confronted him. No one tried to stop him. Because everyone knew there was a line, and up until that moment, it hadn't been crossed. And as long as it wasn't, the silence would remain. The price of safety was destruction. What's most unsettling about this story isn't just what happened on full moon nights, but the psychological weight it placed on the entire community. Because after a while, fear stopped being a passing reaction and became part of daily life. It was like living knowing that, at some point each month, something would happen, something impossible to stop, and all that remained was to wait. And maybe that waiting was what made everything so suffocating. It wasn't the sudden shock, it was the anticipation, the silent knowledge that when the moon rose full in the sky, everyone would feel that same tension spreading slowly through their bodies again. The hours leading up to those nights had a strange atmosphere, almost impossible to explain to someone who had never experienced it. The sky felt heavier, the wind carried a different kind of chill. Even the animals behaved differently. Dogs barked without direction, chickens settled in too early, and even horses showed signs of unease, as if nature itself sensed that something was about to happen. And that only fed the fear even more, because when even the animals seemed to know, it became hard to believe it was just superstition. Inside the houses, the mood shifted too. Conversations grew quieter, adults spoke less, and children felt it even without understanding. The silence was broken only by small noises, wood creaking, wind slipping through cracks, or the distant sound of someone breathing anxiously, trying to pretend calm. No one needed to explain anything. Fear spoke for itself. And then came the moment, that instant, when the night seemed to hold its breath, and shortly after, the first crash. A sharp, violent, abrupt sound, as if something massive had thrown itself against the allard. Then another and another, followed by the sound of trunks being torn apart, leaves being ripped away, branches snapping in sequence. It wasn't continuous, it was chaotic, irregular, as if it reflected a desperate struggle, a battle between brute force and resistance. She remembers lying still, trying to control her breathing while listening to it all from her room, her heart racing, her eyes fixed on the ceiling, and a single question pounding in her child's mind. What if this time he stops? Because that was the real horror, not the noise, but the silence that might come after. Because if the sounds stopped too soon, it meant the banana grove might not have been enough, and that possibility hung over everyone. That's what kept the community trapped in that invisible pact. No one dared interfere with the man. No one dared confront him or even show they knew, because there was a cruel logic behind that silence. As long as he had somewhere to release it, everyone would be safe. It was an uneasy coexistence with the unexplainable, a kind of agreement between human and monster. But time has a silent way of changing everything. The years passed, she grew up, the nights continued, the banana trees kept falling, until, without any warning, everything stopped. At first, no one understood. The moon appeared as always, the sky looked the same, the wind blew just the same, but there was no noise, none. That absence of sound was, in a way, even more disturbing than any previous night, because the silence, which once signaled fear, now seemed to hide something different, something final. The next morning, some people walked to the grove expecting to find the usual destruction, but it was intact. No trees uprooted, no scattered leaves, no sign of anything. The image felt wrong, almost impossible, and then the news came. The man had died during the night. No commotion, no strange circumstances. He had simply died. And in that moment, The weight of that coincidence fell on everyone, because from that night on, it never happened again. Never again. Not the next month, not the one after, not years later, as if something had been ended forever. And that's exactly where this story becomes harder to ignore. Because if all of this were just collective imagination, why did it end at that exact moment? Why did the destruction stop along with that man's death? Why did the banana grove, for so many years the stage of that unexplainable violence, remain untouched ever since? Maybe there's a rational explanation. Maybe there's something that was never noticed. Maybe all of this can be explained as coincidence. But those who lived through it don't believe that. She herself says that even today, when the full moon lights up the field with that same pale glow, she still feels a chill run through her body automatically. She still remembers the sound. She still remembers lying still, listening to something monstrous tearing through the night, while everyone silently prayed for it to end there. And maybe the most disturbing aspect of all is imagining what went on in that man's mind, if he truly had awareness during it. Imagine carrying a curse like that, knowing that at some point you would lose control and needing to fight desperately against yourself, needing to choose destruction as a form of protection. That completely changes the classic image of the monster, because it stops being just a violent creature and becomes someone at war with himself, someone trapped between humanity and something far darker. And maybe that's exactly what makes this story so unsettling, the possibility that evil doesn't always come in the form of pure cruelty. Sometimes it comes with resistance, with struggle, with awareness. And that raises an impossible question to ignore. How many monsters are out there, fighting silent battles against their own nature, while the rest of the world doesn't even notice? And worse, how many of them might, one day, lose? If this story got under your skin, then there's another one that might leave you even more unsettled. An account that begins inside a silent hospital and ends with something so strange that no one has ever been able to explain it. Now let me ask you something. If you knew who the man behind that transformation was, would you have stayed silent too?